Welcome to the Stellar Hour. As you can see, it's finally sweater weather here in Arizona. So wonderful. It's the first week, I think, that we've even had to consider maybe turning on our heat, which has been really lovely. I know my friends on the East Coast can't believe that I'm saying that I'm envious or jelly of their cold weather, but I am. I miss it. I think sometimes the differences that we experience are very important to us, even though they may not seem so welcome. It's only through difference that we see our lives. It's like this morning I was speaking to a coworker about a contract I'm negotiating, and she's like, "Well, there's just 6 weeks left in this year," and I thought, "Oh my gosh, there's only 6 weeks left in this year." I think to myself, what have I done in this year? What have I been intentional about? What am I doing? And how aware am I about what I'm doing? It's kind of interesting because I've been going back and reading some of my old journals, which can be somewhat painful, about recognizing who I was and where I was, and thinking that if I can put myself back then, how much more aware I thought I was of who I am than I really was as I read about it today. As I read about myself today, back then, I realized that I wasn't as aware as I thought I was. And there were pieces of, I hate to say the puzzle, but it is, about life that I wasn't as in tune with at the time as I thought I was. And this is giving me a very great sense of humility to recognize that becoming aware isn't like getting a prize. It's not something you can go out and buy. It's not that I've got more than you or you've got more than me. It's like, what does it mean for me? What am I taking from it? How aware am I of myself? Because it really does start with me. It's not about you or other people or um, what I oftentimes perceive as happening out in the world. It can be a really strange thing. And another thing that started this is I'm going to go off on a tangent. I'm going to go off on a lot of tangents tonight. I'm just having one of those days. I'm not feeling so grounded. I didn't do my show last week. I was very upset. So my dog died, which is really tragic. Um, Tragic, I guess. That just brings me to think about like life and death. Is it tragic? Well, it's tragic for me because I miss her. Um, I think about how it all happened, and that to me is tragic. So on Tuesday night, I'm sitting here at my desk and I hear a yelping sound. I thought it was my other dog, Jojo. And I looked down and it was Roberta, my dog who'd been sick. And she was contorted and she was like having a seizure. And she kind of like passed out, and I was completely freaked out. She's had a lot of medical issues. She's only 10 years old and she was diabetic. So I pick her up and I'm like, I've got to rush her to the emergency vet. It's only like 7:30 at night. My vet's closed. I've got to get her there. So I rush her to the emergency vet. I am just extremely distressed. They take her from me and they take her into the back room. And they do a quick assessment on her. And then the lady at the front desk contacts me and says, "Hey, come up front." She's like, here's what the tests are going to take and the procedures we have to do. You have to pay $450 up front before we'll even treat your dog. And I'm like, wow, $450? But I'm thinking, I don't care at this point, so I go ahead and pay. So about 20 minutes goes by and the vet comes out and she asks me to come back into a room with her. And she says, Roberta is extremely sick. She's going to need our gold package of care. And I'm thinking to myself, okay. And what's going through my mind is I love my dog and I know she's really sick. Not only is she diabetic, she has a heart murmur and some other issues that are going on concomitantly. So there's a lot going on, but I'm also not prepared for her to die. So the vet looks at me and she says, well, with the gold standard of care, it's going to be an additional $2,500. And I said, what? $2,500 from now until like 7 a.m. so I can take her to my vet? And she's like, well, she's a very sick dog. And I was like, wow, I was so shocked. And I didn't want to seem like a bad person. And I'm like, I don't have the money. And I think to myself, I love my dog, but at the same time, to pay $2,500 in addition to the $450 I already paid, like $3,000 to keep my dog alive for the night. And then on top of it, the vet says, well, we can't guarantee we can keep her alive through the night. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting. So I thought about it, and I was like, I said to the vet, I can't afford it. And she's like, well, you can open up a Care credit card. I said, no, I can't open up a Care credit card. And the vet actually said to me, do you have any friends or family that we could call who could give you the money? I looked at her, I thought, who are you pimping for? I mean, where's the concern for my dog's life? I mean, I recognize that emergency vets provide a special service, and I expect it to cost more, just like when you go to the emergency room versus going to urgent care or going to your doctor. But seriously, this is a cash business, right? They make you pay up front, and if you don't pay, you get no service. And so I said to the vet, yeah, no, I'm not in a position to pay another $2,500. So she says, well, we'll do an abbreviated plan and we'll come back to you. So they come back to me with a plan for $1,200 about 30 minutes later. And I said, no. And then I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, I'm going to leave my sick dog here at this emergency vet where she's in another room in a crate by herself. And I'm like, she's all alone. So I'm like, this is just really feeling disgusting to me. I mean, the commoditization of life. It's like, if you care enough for your dog, won't you pay all this money? Aren't you a good person? Because, that's what you should do. So then they come back to me again, a third time, and then they gave me a quote for $750. And I said, that's okay. I would just appreciate if you would get my dog ready. I'm taking her home. And so the vet gets very upset with me, and she's like, well, fine. And so they get Roberta ready, and I take her home. And I said, Roberta, I want you to make it through the night. I slept on the floor with her. And in the morning, she was still alive, and I took her to my vet. She was still very sick. And what bothers me the most about it is that I was in a very distressed situation, and my dog was in a very distressed situation. But there was no care about Roberta or myself. It was just about the money. And so I started doing some research on this a couple of days later, and I realized that Mars Corporation has been buying up all of these emergency vet services like VCA, Banfield, Blue Pearl. And they basically have an oligopoly on the market. And so they take advantage of people, and it's a cash business because you have to pay up front. And you love your animals like you love family members. I mean, granted, I understand that it's a dog, or it could be a cat. And I appreciate the fact that the service is available after hours, but should we have to pay that much? I mean, look at what's happening in life today. Everything is a cost. I mean, you can't do anything without an extra charge today. And it plays on our emotions. It's like, I wanted to do everything I could for my dog, and I have spent so much money. And I hate to say that because then it makes me feel bad to say, hey, look at how much money I've already spent taking care of my dog, and I really love her and I want her to be alive. And she did end up dying. So she did die the next day. I stayed home from work. Thankfully, I work for a great organization, and I stayed home from work that day. I worked from home, and starting towards the end of the day, I could tell Roberta was dying, and I was very conflicted about it. And I thought, what am I going to do? Am I going to rush her to the vet? Should I have her euthanized? And I thought to myself, really? Do you really want to do that, Kathy? And I looked at Roberta and I said, hey, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to take you to the vet? Do you want me to do this? And I just got a sense that she didn't, and that she just wanted me to continue holding her as I'd done. And I did. And so I held her until she died, and holding her, while she took her last breaths. And I felt really good that I was there for her, and I allowed myself to be present with that while she died. And I think that was a really important thing for all of us. And my sense was that, even when she stopped breathing and her body died, I could still sense her around me. And it gave me a really different perspective about what is death, you know? It felt very peaceful, and I had the sensation that she was very thankful to have me there with her, as I was thankful for her for that experience. And it's like we're so afraid of it. So this is going to sound really weird, and yet I'm going to share it. So my husband was traveling. He was en route when I could sense that she was really passing. And I said, "Hey, how far are you from home?" And he's like, 15 minutes. And I said, "Wow, she's really not doing well. I hope she makes it, until you can get home and say goodbye to her." Well, she died before he got home. And when he got home, he held her, and we both held her. And we thought, "Oh, what are we going to do?" And I said, "I just don't want to leave her here." I said, I want her to be in bed with us." I said, I don't sense that she's gone. And I just feel like it's an important thing to do. And we did. And it wasn't gross. It's like, think about it. I thought about it for myself. What makes me think this is so weird? She was just alive a few minutes ago. She's the same dog. Granted, she's passing on, but she's not gone completely. Like, what's wrong with that? Like, why are we so afraid of it? Like, when somebody dies, it's like, "Ooh, they've got the cooties, something bad's going to happen to us." It's like, "Ooh, don't touch a dead person, or don't be around a dead dog, because you're going to catch it." It's almost like death is contagious, but it's not. It's normal. And yet we think it's not normal. And this is likely why in our culture, we don't talk about death. Like, think about when somebody dies, do we say, "Hey, my friend died"? No, we say, my friend passed on. And then people will say, "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss." It's fascinating the way that we language this. We don't speak about the truth of it. We don't speak about the truth of death. We don't say this person died. And I've become extremely mindful of this. And so I had a very good, very dear friend of mine die in August. And I've been very mindful of how I speak about his death. And I say he died. He didn't pass on, Yes, it is a loss, but he died. And I think we have to be really open about that and say what it is, instead of using euphemisms to describe what's happened. I think that we have a lot of issues around dealing with loss in our world. I think that loss is a very difficult thing for people because we don't deal with our initial losses in life. And because we don't deal with our initial losses in life, which basically are tied to not being seen for who we want to be, and who we are in the world, in our primary relationships. And I'm going back to childhood again. I always do, because it's so important, because it's the key to life. And so we want to move away from it because our senses of loss make us feel inadequate, or our sense of loss makes us feel so vulnerable that we want to avoid it. And so when loss comes into our life, it triggers that same sense of loss that we don't want to touch and experience because we don't know how to process through it. But it's a very normal part of life. So how do we learn to engage with that? How do we learn to recognize that, we are not going to live forever? This whole thought of like transhumanism, of using technology to augment ourselves, it's all of this thing of like a fear of death. And what's interesting is that we can be engaged with life in living through Eros, or we can have a fear of life in Thanatos. And it really seems that we are so focused on a fear of death versus and enjoyment and an engagement in life. It's like we're always learning to die, whether or not we're paying attention to it or not. Like, I don't watch television, but my understanding today is that a lot of TV shows are around like death and dying. And there are all of these shows on TV, like police shows or shows like years ago, like shows like Emergency or, oh golly, I can't remember that hospital show. There's been so many hospital, like House and ER. There's so many shows about that. Then there are shows about like death and dying, like Law and Order. All of these TV shows, they're all about death. And some people say that it's a catharsis for us to watch that, but I really think it's a way that we keep ourselves separate from it, that we don't want to acknowledge it. And so it's probably why we also use mortuaries. And I'm going to go off on another tangent here. So last week was election week, right? And so I was like, gee, where do we vote? And I drove by the elementary school, which is where we used to vote, and there were no signs up or anything. So I went on the internet and I looked up where to vote in my neighborhood. Well, wouldn't you know, this is so wild. We voted at the Messenger Mortuary. I kid you not. So in North Scottsdale here, our official polling place was the Messenger Mortuary. I mean, how bizarre is that? I mean, these threads might seem so disparate, but they all come together and they all tell a familiar story about humanity and how it is that so much has seemingly changed in our lives, but it's the external world. Very little has changed in the inner life of human beings, of man. We still experience the same emotions. We still are challenged experiencing the things that we experience with our emotions. So we can look out and look at the cities that we live in, the architecture. We can look at technology in our smartphones and think that we're so evolved and things have changed so much. I'm looking at my phone right now to see how long I've been recording. But how much has really changed about human beings? You know, I have this fabulous book called, let me just reach for it right now. Well, I can't reach it. Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. The copy I have was published in 1854. It's totally falling apart, but I love to get original books because editions moving forward, like third, fourth, fifth editions, things change in the books, and so the meanings get changed. So I, as much as possible, like to get first or second edition books. And as I was reading through that book, it made me realize that things that happened in the 1500s, the 1700s, the 1800s are still happening today. It's the circumstances that look different, but human nature hasn't really changed. When you think about it, how much has really changed with human nature? I would say not a whole lot. We conflate and we confuse what's happening in the outer world with what's happening in our inner world. So we can look out and we can see our cool smartphones or whatever and think that we're much more advanced than we are, but are we? How does technology really change who we are? And in fact, does technology actually de-evolve us as being a human? Are we de-evolving because we're so much more separate, that we are not connecting with one another in relationship as we did, but we're connecting with each other through technology, through text messaging, not even through the phone anymore. I mean, I have friends that say, hey, I was going to call you, but I didn't want to interrupt you. I'm like, just call me. I don't care. If I'm busy, I'll just say, hey, I'm busy. But I'll have people say, hey, is it okay to call you right now? And I think to myself, what? Of course, call me. Think about like years ago, like 20 years ago, people would just stop by your house. Nobody stops by your house anymore. We're getting more and more isolated. And technology is accelerating that. In fact, think about another jump I'm going to make now is like with human connections. It's like people don't even meet each other in person anymore. They meet each other through like, I can't even believe this thing, Tinder, or they meet each other through Match.com. It's like, who are you really meeting? Are you meeting the person, or are you meeting who they want you to think that they are? When we're chatting, you can't read facial expressions. You don't get the prosody of voice, the tone of voice. What is the person communicating through that? It's like we're trying to communicate like through like a Twitter language of 144 characters or less. It's like we almost, well, this is what they really want, is an emoji language. Like, hey, we're not going to use words, we're going to use emojis, right? It's just so much easier, so much more simple. But is all of this seemingly simplicity of life adding value to life? Is it adding depth to life? We were having a conversation at work tonight, and this might seem politically incorrect, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. About the Mormon religion. One of the things about the Mormon religion is there's a lot of connection. Can it be controlling? Some people might think it is, but there's also something appealing about it to people, and that it provides a lot of community. And it's one of the fastest growing religions in the world right now. And I wonder, is it because so much community and connection is offered through that religion? Because people are desperate for connection, but they no longer know how to connect. It's as if though we're losing this aspect of our humanness, that our humanness comes through relationship, yet we're challenged in relationship and relating to and with each other, because we're also challenged relating to and with ourselves. We're given so many models. We're given so much information of what it supposedly means to be human, what things really mean. And we no longer consider, what does it mean for me? I think, what does the expert tell me? What is it that society believes? But do I consider, what do I believe? Do I trust myself in that? There's so many different theories. One theory will say this, another theory will say that. You can find anything you want. You can find anything today to meet your belief. And this ties into cybernetics. This ties into cybernetics in the information age. There's really something to this. We confuse information with wisdom and knowledge. Information is only information. Wisdom is only when we do something with that information and we change ourselves with the information. I can accumulate a lot of intellectual knowledge, but how does that change me? It doesn't, unless I choose to do something with it. So I think that this is something that we don't really stop to consider, because it's almost like information has a value, like something, like a diamond. But a diamond really doesn't have value except for the value that we place upon it. Diamonds aren't rare. Diamonds seem to be rare because the De Beers family keeps them in short supply, but diamonds are very, very aware. I mean, they're very prevalent. They're not in short supply, but we seem to think they are, and because of it, we place a high value on it. In the same way that we do with information. But is that information valuable? What is the value of the information? And so we're so busy consuming information. We're so busy attached to phones and iPads and our computers. But what do we do with it? Do we reflect on it? Do we consider the impact it has on us and the connections that we're making with ourselves and our lives and our relationships? I don't think so. And I think that it's exacerbating this sense of hyper-normalcy that we see in the world, that we're accepting things as normal that shouldn't be normal. It's like I look around today, I don't even recognize the world I'm living in most of the time. I hear what people speak about, and I think to myself, I'm in shock. And I look at glimpses of what I see on television. I don't watch it, if I walk by and see it, or if I travel a lot. So when I'm at an airport, you can't get away from the television. They're omnipresent. And I look at what I see and I think it's just as disgusting, it's profane. Um, what's the value to all of this? I think it just helps us stay distracted. It helps us to stay busy. We like busy. Busy is the new drug. Busy is a status drug. I'm so busy. We're so busy, but busy doing what? What are we busy doing? Are we really busy doing things that matter? Or are we busy doing things that keep us occupied and that really increase our sense of almost anxiety or fear, such that we don't really have to think because we're so busy all the time? I hope this makes sense, because it's like we don't stop to think because we've got so much information, we've got so much stimulus around us that we really don't stop and reflect on what any of it means. And then we think it's good and we think it's valuable. But in what way? How does it help your life? So like for me, I think about, I'm working back in corporate on a year-long assignment after not having worked in corporate for 8 years. And I've spent the last 8 years doing like my own consulting and coaching work. And I've had a lot of time to reflect on myself. I intentionally spent a lot of time reflecting and working on who am I and how am I creating what I want in the world? What's the meaning that I'm making? I've spent a lot of time on all of this. And as I've gone back in corporate, I realize I'm not as crazy as I used to be. If I think back on when I was working in corporate, like in 2009 and 2010, and things that used to tweak me and how I'd get so agitated over things and I'd have to get things done my way. And now I'm working back in corporate again. And I have to say, I'm really enjoying it. I really like the company. I love the work I'm doing. I find it fascinating because I'm so different in it. I am not the same person that I used to be. And I love that about myself. I love the fact that I have learned how to self-regulate myself. I love the fact that I have become aware of what my own defense mechanisms were and how I was distorting my own reality, and how now when I'm dealing with things that used to make me nuts, it's not making me nuts today. I mean, do things bother me at times? Oh, for sure. But I can get a grip on it now, and it doesn't make me nuts the way that it used to make me nuts. And I can enjoy it. And I think this has been such a great experience for me. If you had told me back in 2010 when I left my corporate job that I would be back in again and doing this, I would have been like, you're smoking crack. No way. I thought for up until about last year, there's no way I'm going to do anything different than what I'm doing. I thought I was always going to do my coaching work and do workshops and speaking. And I came to find I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought. And it was a really big paradigm shift for me. And I had to let myself let go of what I thought my life was going to be, which has been a challenging thing because sometimes we get so invested. We get so invested in what we think our lives should be. Or, we go to school to do something. So like say somebody goes to school to be a lawyer and then they realize, God, being a lawyer kind of sucks. Or being a doctor isn't what I thought it was going to be. Or my career path isn't what I thought it was going to be. What do I do with that? It's not, we underestimate that. It is not an easy thing. When you put plans in place for yourself like that, and then you think, or you start to experience it's not what you think it is or what you had hoped it would be. And then you have an opportunity to recalibrate. But oftentimes we double down. It's like, if I just try a little bit harder, just put more energy into it, or discount what I'm experiencing. Nope, it's really not what it is. I'm just not thinking about it the right way. It'll be different. Yeah, but what happens when it's not? And you're right. And that what you're experiencing is accurate, your assessment of what you're experiencing, and it calls for doing something different. That can bring up anxiety, right? It can bring up, if what I thought isn't what it is, I could be wrong, and God knows humans don't like to be wrong. What happens when I'm wrong, right? We say, oh, we value making mistakes. Oh, no, we don't. We don't value making mistakes. We value being right. So it can be very challenging when you realize that things in your life have changed, and what you thought things were going to be, or things like objectifying. I'm not even saying what's experiencing. I thought what I was going to be doing for work is going to be different than it was. And what I'm finding is that I wasn't really enjoying it anymore. And that caused me to have to make a big shift and be uncomfortable with that to explore something else. But I could. I could do both and. I could be excited about thinking about the prospects of doing something else and recognizing that things didn't turn out exactly the way I thought. So what? Right? So what? Really, who knows but me? Is it like I'm worried about, like, ooh, what are other people going to think? WWOPT. What will other people think? You know, we're so worried at times, like, what do you think other people are going to think? Well, who really cares? Because you know what? They're doing the same thing. They're so worried about themselves, they really don't have a whole lot of space in their mind for you. So they're doing the same thing. And so people are so worried then about what they think other people are going to think. It's a crazy game. It's a very effective game. And this did come out of cybernetics because they did understand this, and they started to cultivate what's called an other orientation. Juice Merleau, who wrote the book The Rape of the Mind in 1954, I believe, talks about this in his book. I mean, 1954, right? He talked about how social engineering was creating a society who were so concerned about what other people thought, or how a person thinks they exist in the mind of another. You know, I have to give a shout out to my friend Amir on Facebook. I shared with him, I said, sometimes I get so super conscious of myself when I'm doing a podcast because I know I make weird faces or whatever. And he says, you know what, Kathy, just get over yourself and do it. And I have to say, I am so appreciative of that, because whenever I start getting self-conscious about it now, I think about what he said, and you know what? So what? So thank you very much for that. And it's true. And it's allowed me to engage and to be more comfortable in doing this, and to be able to share what it is I've learned, and what I'd like to share with others about my own experience and how I've been learning and continue to learn through it, such that we can all learn from each other. Because I think this is how it works. It's not necessarily always just about like reading books, but it's like, how do we apply what comes into our awareness and put it into practice to shift our lives? And to not get so hung up on like doing it right, because my God, I was a class A perfectionist. I made myself nuts. I'd perseverate around things. I'd ruminate and think about how it should be done the right way. And you know what? Other people didn't really care. And so I could make myself nuts over all this stuff. But for what purpose? What reason? I'd get so disconnected from myself on it. And I realized now it's like I'm going through this period that it's very unusual and very strange, especially for me, because I've not had this experience before, where I've given myself permission to do something different, where I'm not so regimented, where I'm not letting all of these thoughts direct me, where I really am allowing myself to experience myself. Now I'm letting myself experience when I feel distressed. I'm feeling distressed, you know, and I'm not going to move away from it. I'm just going to let myself experience what I'm experiencing without thinking it has to be different. Because to the degree I can experience what I'm experiencing, I'm digesting it. It's like a lion eats 70 pounds of food, right? Well, animals, I mean, not food, but a lion kills another animal and eats it. A lion will sit there for 3 days or lay down while it digests its food. And we're the same way. So if we think about being in this cybernetic world, this information society, where we're constantly taking in so much stimulus, do we ever stop to digest it? How can we ever be present for ourselves when we're always being so stimulated, taking in so much information, but we're not processing through it? And so this has been such, you know, it hasn't been a very long time. I've only been back for like a month now. And so we'll see if I change my tune in a couple of months or so, if I still feel the same way. But but so far, I find it fascinating that I'm having these really different experiences that I didn't think that I could have, or that I would have, and that it's not the way I thought it was going to be. And that's okay, because I don't have to have everything thought out, because that's another part of perfectionism. It's another part of always thinking about things, that if I have it all planned out enough, then I'm going to be prepared if something bad happens or something doesn't go the way I think it should go. And, the thing that I realized is that I would spend all of this energy trying to plan these things out. And then if something didn't go the way I expected, all of my energy was gone, because I had spent it perseverating, or I'd spent it thinking about what's going to happen next. Worst case scenario, well, if this happens, then that. And I realized there was something my friend Nita Lipinski said, and she wrote this blog a few years ago, and it really sticks with me. She had some really challenging things happen in her life. And in her blog, she wrote, in this moment, when she woke up in the middle of the night and she was very stressed out and she was feeling a lot of anxiety, she said, in this moment, I am safe. That was such a profound awareness for me. In this moment, I am safe. We are always managing our emotional safety. And when we're mind traveling, where we're going back to the past, we're going into the future, we're jeopardizing our own emotional safety, because we're not where we can do anything with it, which is in this moment. And I will bring that to mind for myself. If I am stressed out over something, or I'm going into worst case scenario for myself, I go back and I reflect on what she said. In this moment, I am safe. And it's true. In this moment, I am safe. And I just love that, the simplicity of it and the truth of it. It's very, very profound. And I think that we don't consider how important our emotional safety is to us. And this is why our sense of safety is always being manipulated or compromised through media, through movies and TV. It's like there's always an imminent danger. There's always the next thing that's going to happen. There's going to be another terror attack. There's going to be another false flag event. You never know what's going to happen. There's never any predictability. And what humans crave most is predictability and security. It ties back into our first year of life. We want to know what we can predict. We want to be able to predict what we can expect. And so this is oftentimes why we create what we don't want, because we want our expectations to be right even when they're bad. And so this is going to sound really strange and contradictory, but if I expect bad things to happen, I'm going to look for them to happen. And then when they do, paradoxically, it will make me feel safe even though it's bad. But I can predict it. So if I'm a person that tends to see that things may not work out so well, or I expect negative things, it's going to be hard for me to shift through that and expect something positive. So I remember back when I was working, we were working on a project, and one of my coworkers, I was pointing out some things. So I have this really big gift to be able to see how things aren't going to work. And I was sharing something about a project we're working on, and my coworker said to me, why do you always have to be so negative, Kathy? And I was like, woof. I was like, wow, I hadn't really thought about that. And it was a pivotal moment in my life. And I was like, as much as I didn't want to admit it, she was right. I could see very quickly how things wouldn't work, but not how they could work. And it really took me back and made me start to recognize, what's the benefit for me for seeing how things aren't going to work versus what the possibilities are? And so it was something I really had to pay a lot of attention to, and I have paid a lot of attention to it. It's taken me a while, 8 years, and I still work on it. to recognize how easy it is for me to see how things at times can't work right, or I could go into that negative place. So I now am really aware of my self-talk. I'm really aware of the words I use and the frames, and thinking to myself, am I scaring myself right now and saying how things aren't going to work? Or am I looking at what the possibilities are and how I can be more resourceful? And these are the seemingly small things that we do that start to change who we are. And it was that practice of putting this in the front of my mind that helped me to start shifting. And I think why I'm having a different experience today, being back in the corporate world, and that I approach it in a different way. I've learned something different. It's like muscle. So like if I want to go to the gym and build up my muscle, I can't just say, hey, I want to have like a big muscle here. It's going to take me a while to develop it. And it's going to be painful to develop it. And that's the process that we go through with ourselves too. It's like I realize, like, oh, I got a little bit of flab going on here. I don't like that. I want to change it. But to change it, I'm going to have to make effort, and I'm going to have to develop it. I'm going to have to exercise it. I'm going to have to be mindful of it. I'm going to have to remember to go to the gym every day, or go to the gym 3 times a week, right? I'm going to have to be purposeful and intentional about what I'm doing. And that takes effort and energy. It doesn't take so much energy to do our default patterns. So whatever your default pattern will be is different than mine, but our default patterns are easy. They're habitual. They're unconscious. They're automatic. And they work. They do work. Even though sometimes they create what we don't want. Well, a lot of times to create what we don't want, they're comfortable. And we know what we can expect because they create predictable results. And doing something different means that we have to put effort into it. And it's uncomfortable. I think we really underestimate how challenged we are with dealing with discomfort with our bodies. That to do something different requires self-regulation. And I think this is the complete key to being able to shift yourself. It is being able to self-regulate yourself, meaning to self-soothe, to manage yourself without needing other people to change or the world to change. Because for many people, change means for them that the other person has to change or the world has to change. Something has to be different for them other than themselves. It's hard to be different for ourselves. It's hard to be able to tolerate, when we're experiencing something distressing and, we have that flush going through our body, that anxiety, or you got butterflies in your stomach, or you get heat in your head. You have all of these sensations going through your body. Think about it. The most powerful energy in the world is emotion. It is not money. It is emotion. It is what rules this world. And that's why it's so manipulated. This is why we don't really know how to deal with our emotions. I know it seems so simple, right? But is it? If it was, it is simple, but it's not necessarily easy to do because we have to be able to tolerate these feelings within our body. And often the feelings give us a sensation that the feeling impels us to do something that may not necessarily be in our best interest. So to be able to manage those sensations and the feeling is the key for the self-regulation. That's going to help us to create more of what we want in the world versus to continue the same habitual patterns. Because I'll tell you, probably 95% of the people in the world live their first year of life their entire life. Yeah, it changes. It shows up in different ways. We live in bigger bodies. The people in our lives seemingly change, but the patterns of what people experience are pretty much the same. Because it is more challenging to be aware of this and to do something different. And, we'll go out and we'll seek other people who can give us the tools or tell us what to do. And yes, that can be helpful. But the truth is it really starts with us. And I'm going to go back and harp on something that I did a few weeks ago. which is around this whole thing around trying to figure yourself out by trying to figure out how the world works. And so if I can just figure out how the world works and I can understand social engineering, then I'm going to understand myself. But where's the self-regulation in that? What am I doing differently about myself based on what it is that I know? Like I can have a lot of information about like what's happening in the world, but what am I doing differently about myself? How am I applying that? So, you know, absolutely research is important to understand how social engineering works. But if you don't go to the next step and reflect on it and ask yourself, how am I affected by it? How am I affected by my environment? Because this is what cybernetics is all about. Cybernetics is all about how you're affected by the environment and how most people are credulous. And through their credulity, they can never grasp how affected they are by the environment, by what they watch, by their words, by relationships, um, chemtrails in the air. There's so many different things. It's like, how aware are we of what we're experiencing? How aware are we of all of the sensory data around us? Like, do we notice like the little gnat that flies by? Do we notice when we're driving to work that there are other people in cars that are around us? You know, when we listen to music, do you ever listen to the words? I remember a few years ago, my daughter and her friend were in the car with me and the song Pumped Up Kicks came on. And I'm like listening to him, like, oh, that's kind of a cool song. And my daughter's friend Hallie says to me, hey, you know what the words to that song are, don't you? And I'm like, no. And she's like, oh, it's about school shootings. She's like, Robert's got a fast gun. And it's like, you better run faster than my brother's gun. And I'm like, oh my God, I had listened to that song so many times. I had no idea what the words were. And I think to myself, how could that be? Do we really understand the lyrics to the words? I mean, we listen to music all the time, but do we really consider what the lyrics are? Do we really consider how the music is affecting us? What is it doing? Do you notice how do you feel in your body when you're listening to certain music, rap music for in particular? It's mind-blowing to me. People aren't even aware of it. There's so much to be aware of in the information age, right? But what do we pay attention to? Or do we allow our attention to just be taken wherever it goes? Like I had a dog, Elvira. I love that dog. I guess it's a dog day, remembering my dogs. We would walk Elvira, not to lie, she walked me. Who's going to say? She was a border collie. I'd like to think that I walked her. No, she walked me down the street. And I thought to myself, what would it be like if I could have Elvira walk by my side? And I think the same thing about ourselves. How am I walking by my side? How am I managing myself? And I'm not getting pulled down the street by my emotions. I'm not getting pulled down the street by Trump, saying women are getting grabbed by the pussy, and then women are talking about this whole thing about grab them by the ballot or whatever. I mean, you've got to be kidding me. And again, what are they? Naked. Again, using sex. I mean, my golly, does anybody pay attention to how much sex is used to push forward all of these different social narratives? It's really quite something. But again, hypernormalization, we don't even pay attention to it. We don't even notice it anymore. It has become normal. But is normal really normal, or are we just accepting what we're expected to accept because it's normal? But it's not. What is normal? And I think these are things that we have to come to terms with for ourselves. But how aware are we of that? It's like, how do we really know what we really want? How do we know where our beliefs are taking us until we choose to say, I'm going to be really aware of it. I'm going to be intentional and check in with myself. I'm going to notice and I'm going to name what I'm experiencing. And again, at times, how do I even notice Or how do I know that what I'm experiencing is accurate? That I might not be maybe dismissing something or calling something different than it is to make it more comfortable for myself. So maybe I can bypass myself. I don't really have to face something. And it's really fascinating because people will do all kinds of challenging things, like do these mutter runs where they'll run like 25 miles and do swimming, or people will go on extreme diets. They'll do all kinds of things like this, but we won't do the extreme thing of connecting to ourselves and checking in with what our emotions are. It's kind of an interesting thing, isn't it? That we work so hard to be separate from ourselves, that we work so hard to not have to face the reality of who we are and what we're experiencing. It just seems so counterintuitive, and it seems like that really can't be. And I know for a lot of people, they'll say, oh, that's just not true. I was one of those people at one point. I mean, I remember somebody, I was at a workshop, and this woman said to me, Kathy, why do you even have to have any beliefs? And I thought, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Of course you have to have beliefs. If you don't have beliefs, like, where are your guardrails in the world? Like, how can you even like exist without beliefs? It took me 3 years to process through and realize that, beliefs can be like my crutches. Beliefs can be the way that I can bypass myself. Beliefs are the way that I might not have to consider certain things because my belief will say, this is right and that's not right. So I realized that my beliefs my beliefs allowed me to bypass certain things in life. And so another thing I've been doing is recognizing, like, when I feel uh, somebody says something that I think is like, that's just stupid, or you're wrong, that it's probably something I need to sit with and reflect on to say, well, what might be true about it, or why am I having such a strong response to this? Because if I'm feeling that strong to it, there's probably something where I'm experiencing cognitive dissonance, where the information that's being presented is different from what I believe, and I'm either going to push it out of my awareness and relanguage it, or I'm going to allow it to come in and say, well, what could it mean for me? What can I take from this? And again, that takes energy. And it's about, how do I create energy for myself to be able to do this? And it has to be very mindful. I have to be, it's a very mindful process to do this, because to be aware and awake takes a lot of energy. It takes energy too to not be awake, but it doesn't take as much energy. It's automatic. And there's so much that we can do that's automatic. So, I know I've been all over the place tonight, talking about Roberta dying. It still makes me really sad. The experience of all of that, all of these different shifts that I've been going through, that we all go through. But are we really mindful of what we're going through? Do we really pay attention to it? What do we pay attention to? What's important to us? So I think that this is something I'd ask, like, to reflect on, like, what would be one thing you could pay attention to? What's something you could notice, to be mindful of? Because it's these seemingly small things that we do. It's these little tests that come into our lives that make the difference. We often think that it's the big tests in life that make the difference. But, I think it's the small things that happen in life that can really make a difference. It's how we're tested every day. Like when somebody says something, or like a work environment again, like, hey, can you believe that John said such and such? And the invitation is for me, like, yeah, he's such an idiot. Can you believe that he said that? I just can't stand when he speaks in those meetings. Or I can uphold myself and recognize I'm being given an invitation, and I can say, oh, that's really interesting. and not join in, because what's the value of that to me? What's really important about it to me? How can I be more mindful about that? How am I going to be responsible for myself and what I'm experiencing? So I'm going to end on that today, and I thank you very much for joining me. I look forward to speaking with you next week. I think I'm going to go back and start back on cybernetics again and start breaking that down. There's so much to it. I've had quite a few people reaching out to me about it, and I think it's a really valuable topic because there are ways when we can understand about social engineering, in particular cybernetics, which is turned into memetics today, and break it down and understand how does that apply to us, which is cybernetics, meaning to steering society, steering individuals, tie back into us, and how can we make those connections? So that's what I'd like to, I think, start doing again next week. If you have any feedback, please reach out to me. I'd love to hear it. If anybody would love to guest host with me on the show, so happy to speak with you about that, and I look forward to speaking to you next week. Good night.